My father demands that I give my half-brother a job and a piece of the land I inherited from my grandfather after he abandoned me. They tried to attack me, but they all ended up on the floor. My dad and his siblings hated my grandfather for good reasons. Growing up, their dad was an abusive alcoholic towards them and my grandmother. When she died, my dad and his siblings all left home when they turned 18 and never returned. Except for my dad, none of them ever spoke to him again. My dad spoke to my grandfather twice after leaving home. I was 8, at my mom's funeral, when I first met my grandfather. He approached me, kneeled on the ground in front of me, and introduced himself, asked how I was doing. But before I could say anything, my dad had pulled me away from him. He yelled for a bit, then dragged me away. I was 11 when I met him again. When my dad dropped me off at his house and left me there. A few years later, I discovered it was because my dad's new wife didn't want me around. You might think my dad was a boss for doing that. I know I did, but it turned out to be the best thing he could have ever done for me, even if I hated him for it. My grandfather and I became very close. His alcohol-filled days were long behind him, and he taught me everything. He owned a lot of land. A lot of land. He taught me how to grow vegetables, farm, maintain the property and look after the land, care for the animals, and hunt, and pushed me to get an education. I was happiest when he and I were working the land together. During all that time out on the land, working on one project or another, he told me of his life and what he had done to his family. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to reason away his behavior. He told me of all the hurt and pain he caused. When I asked why he didn't try reconciling with his children, he said they can't forget what he put them through. He understood that and accepted it. I was 26 when he died. I called my dad to let him know. I had to tell him who I was. He didn't stay on the line long, told me to take care of the funeral, then hung up. Knowing what I knew of his childhood, I didn't blame him, but he didn't even ask how I was. The resentment I already had for him grew. After the funeral, a young woman introduced herself to me at the wake. She was my cousin. I knew my dad had siblings, but that's all I knew. I had never met them, didn't know anything about them, so I didn't call any of them to let them know about my grandfather. I asked how she knew, and she told me my dad had called her mom. She spent a few days in town after the funeral, and we kept in touch after. We became, and still are, really close. A couple of years later, when she said she was moving into town, I gave her an acre of land. She, her husband, and their kids still live there today. My grandfather left me everything. None of my dad and his siblings contested the will. My cousin told me her mom didn't want anything, not 1 cent, from her father. I guess the rest of them felt that way because neither I nor my lawyer ever heard anything from them. Until last week, my dad called me. His son needs a new start. Apparently he wants to move my way to help with my businesses. I have a few small businesses I run off my property. A working farm where people can stay for a few days to experience farm life. I have a few money-making ventures. Now my half-brother, whom I'd met just one time before I was shipped off to my grandfather, all of a sudden wants to help me. I have all the help I need. I don't need his. I told my dad I would think about it. He's been sending me texts every day, several times a day, asking me about the property and the businesses, suggesting roles his son could fill, telling me that the family looks out for each other and sticks together, telling me my grandfather owes him, telling me what land I should give his son to set him up, and what land would be best for him and his wife when they visit. Whenever I see dad pop up on my screen, I want to smash my phone. My anger and resentment are directed at my dad, not his son, but I still don't want him here. He's a stranger to me. All my grandfather left me is mine now, and I don't owe any of them anything. My cousin and her husband are on my side and say if it were up to them,